Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Khalil Doheny, and I'm head of content at Digital Niche Agency. Today, we have Vincent Bryan from Whooshh. Vincent, how are you doing today?
Good. Thanks, Khalil.
Of course. And while people are coming in, I know we've had a couple of these webinars, but if you want to just give a quick intro to yourself for someone who hasn't tuned in yet, just so they can learn a little bit more about you.
Sure. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Whooshh Innovations. We've been at the company at this for a while now, so I can really answer the questions from the beginning to the end here. And I really am looking forward to spending today answering questions. So I don't intend to be having a formal presentation here today, but really focus on questions of interest to all of you. So take a minute and write down your questions now and get them to Khalil so that we can be sure to hit everybody's questions. For me, this has been a learning experience with Khalil, and I think one of the things that I've found difficult, so be very concise with your questions if you can, is not having that interaction on the other side. So I can't see you. I don't see your name or anything. And if I was talking with you one-on-one, it might come across a little differently than when I'm talking over the video here. So anyway, I hope to answer as best I can the questions. Depending on how many we have, we'll take a shorter or longer time.
Yeah. So. And as Vincent mentioned, this is an opportunity to get your questions answered. If you have that burning question that you really need to get answered, ask it below. That this is, your last chance. This campaign is closing soon, and get your questions now. To make that decision to invest. And yeah, we'll get to answering these questions. The first question I see here is, can you please do a brief overview of Whooshh? I'm not completely familiar, but I am interested in potentially investing.
Yeah, absolutely. The company itself is focused on what we call fish passage or fish transport, depending upon the industry that we're selling into. So, but we're solving a big problem, and it's hard to understand how big that problem is until you start thinking about the amount of protein that is consumed throughout the world, and about 50% of that is fish. So fish becomes a very important part of the equation, and so far as feeding the world, and doing that in a way, whether it's in a river setting where we help get fish over a dam, or in a aquaculture setting where we're helping the grower of the fish transport fish from tank to tank, for example. In these settings, what is the most difficult thing to do is safely move a fish. How do you do that? And it's typically done over the years. It's been done in water, but if you're having to move water over distance or up over a dam, suddenly that becomes a major problem. So we've taken a totally different approach, and we use a pneumatic technology that we've developed. We've achieved, I think, close to 50 patents over the years throughout the world, and really have a technology that can be used for many things. But what's particularly good at is moving objects, if you will, that require very gentle handling, and that's the case with fish. And so with the fish, we can basically, without touching them, deliver them over a dam that can be hundreds of feet high in seconds, and that in of itself is been our goal, to be able to move. Not move per se, but allow the fish to move and migrate when they want, exactly when they want, so that barriers are not blocking them anymore, and they can have a full migration in the river systems. And in the aquaculture setting, it's a different problem, but it is the same problem. It is, how do I move a fish from another tank without having it hit the floor, for example. So these technologies that we have are totally unique. Nobody else in the world does it. And we have really, I guess, become the world's expert in our ability to be able to move fish through our various products that are, and applications that are specific to fish movement problems.
Awesome. And I just do want to put a quick disclaimer. Unfortunately, due to SEC guidelines, we can't answer questions around, future projections, cash flow, use of proceeds. So if you do have any questions around any of that, please send a message directly to Vince. I'm more than happy to answer that. But according to SEC guidelines, we can't answer that in a public forum. It needs to be accessible for everyone.
Yeah, you can do that either on the Start Engine site. There's a question and comment section where that question can be asked publicly. And then we have an investor relations at whoosh.com email that you can send to, and that we'll see what we can do to respond to your question that way.
Let's see what we have here. How do you address the challenges of getting fish to enter the portal?
Yeah, so the portal that for those who don't know, that the passage portal is the system that's sort of behind me there, that's being towed upriver on the Columbia in that picture. What is the way for fish passage, the way that it works is that you need to create an attraction flow in order to have a fish orient towards the entrance of a fish passage or fish way. This problem exists whether it's our system or a fish ladder or a trap for a trap and haul operations. The attraction to the system is always a challenge. Having said that, what we have a distinct advantage with our system in that we have separated, if you will, the two functions of attraction flow, that is getting the fish to come near the device, and the flow required for entry. I want to distinguish that from a fish ladder where all of the attraction water is coming down a fish ladder. So you may have in some of the big dams out here in the West, for example, 500 cubic feet of water per second, even coming down in some of these ladders. Those kinds of volumes of water make it difficult for the fish to ascend up those ladders. But the water coming out of there at the bottom is often deemed necessary to attract the fish to the site, to understand that this is the way to go through. What we have done, because we can have a system that's floating, like on this one behind me here, we have a lot of flexibility on where we can locate the system. And so our first and foremost thing is properly locating the system. So where are the fish naturally going given the flows at that particular location? So you can take care of a lot of the problem, get the fish close by putting the system where the fish are already attracted. So that's the first thing that we do. The second thing, depending on where we are, on the West Coast, for salmon, for example, an Alaska steep pass has proven extremely good at on the entry of the fish into our system. And the Alaska Steep Pass is really just a ramp, if you will, with about 10 CFS of water in it. So if you align the steep pass with the naturally occurring attraction flow, you can produce the appropriate flow. If that isn't possible, the alternative is basically to create an entrance that is much like a fish ladder, but if the fish ladder doesn't go up in this instance, but you create a flow by either pumping or gravity feed water down into a pool that flows over. So the fish comes over that and into a pool for which we then have our 10 CFS of water coming down the steep pass, and there's no competing flow. So they can quickly identify that this is the way forward. And we had a great example of just that up at Big Bar in Canada in 2020. And that kind of a system was put in, and we had fish entering the system at about 27 fish per minute. So as long as there's fish around, it can be very effective at moving and attracting fish into the system.
And are there any recent field case studies on sorting of desirables and undesirables?
Have there been any field studies? Is that what you said?
Yeah, any field case studies on sorting of desirables and undesirables, re limiting passage of invasive fish?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So that is what everybody's referring to there. That is our official recognition system. And really, for the first time, we're enabling the fisheries managers to have a lot more control over what is happening in the rivers. So if you have a dam up in a river, it's blocking all of the fish that want to go up or down. But if you put in a fish ladder or a fish lift, any fish that's in those waters can go up or down. That can be good or bad. It can be bad if those fish are invasive or predatory to the native fish in those locations. And unfortunately, many of the rivers have these invasive species. So what we call selective passage, where the system itself identifies the species of the fish and only allowing the native fish through, is totally within our capabilities, and the computer system that's on there and the vision system all comes together with AI and the algorithms there to identify those fish. So a project that we just delivered on, it's not been installed yet, but it's on site. We're waiting for the river to come down in Illinois, is focused at exactly this, where we will be removing the invasive carp out of the Illinois River. And in this instance, the plan is not to be transporting fish over the dams, but removing those invasive carp and allowing the native fish to just continue on their way. So I think it should be very exciting for the agencies and the fisheries managers, because if you think about it, you have the ability to actually clean up a river. And on the Columbia River that's behind me, for example, historically, there have been 8 to 10 million salmon that would have migrated up this river. That number is a tenth of that now. But what that has been replaced with is about 8 million American shad, which are non-native fish. And the impacts that those fish are having on the entire food web is really unclear, and it may not be good. For example, those American shad may well be feeding the other invasive species that are in those rivers and causing a population explosion. So you can imagine if you've got a migrating shad and you can remove every one of them coming through past the dams, you can quickly, in a matter of just a couple of years, really clean up the rivers.
Awesome. Do you have any patents or patent pending on your product?
Yeah, we do. So about around the world, they fall into about 5 or 6 different patent families, but there's about 48 patents that have actually been granted and issued. And then there's probably another 50 that are pending in another family of patents. So they are not all under the Whooshh name. Just for those who have been with us for a while, we had an earlier name, so some of those are under other names. So if you're looking it up, reach out to me. I can point you in the right direction if you're interested in looking at them.
And again, we have to be vague on how we answer this question. When do you expect the company to be cash flow positive? Will you need to do another raise after this close?
Yeah, really good question. We were cash flow positive in 2020. So let me start by saying that if you go through our financials and so forth, you'll see that we had about a $2.2 million profit, $2.3 million profit that year. Then COVID really did a number on us so far as the number of projects that we could actually proceed with. Why we're excited about what's coming is that projects that had been delayed here really for years because of COVID are coming online again. So we are seeing the second half of this year as finally a rebound from the COVID hangover that we called it internally here. So while I need to be careful what we say here, what I can tell you is from a model standpoint, back in 2020, we had about $5.6 million of revenue and $2.3 million of profit. It does not take that many projects to turn the company around. Why we're raising money though is because we see this opportunity coming at us. In fact, it's a little scary to look at because we have to put the company in a position to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming right now. So for those of you who followed our updates, we've applied for about $4 million in grant money related to some of these projects just at the end of March. And this was after going through an initial vetting process where they encouraged us to make the formal applications. So while there's no guarantee that we will get all of those projects, every one of them is a significantly important project, not just for us, but for the fisheries and management plans, as well as really the energy sector. Department of Energy is the funder of those grants, and really hydropower as it relates to the whole movement towards a clean energy grid is it's critical, and many of the dams in the country do not have any fish passage at all. So in order for them to be able to renew their own licenses, they often have to deal with fish passage. And as you can imagine, in a dam that's already been up for 50 years, it's not easy to retrofit something that out of concrete that wasn't designed there in the first place. So our system is specifically designed to deal with that issue cost effectively and timely, so that that the country can continue to produce the hydropower that it needs. And I think I should add one other thing here. That 95% or so of the dams in the country have no hydropower on them at all. And in 2018, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory did a study in looking at the non-power dams and identifying those that could have hydropower on them. And as somebody who is supportive of fish passage, I only see that as really good news to put in hydropower on non-powered dams. And the reason is that that in most states and under federal law, there's a process that the dam operator has to go through to get their license that then requires them to address this fish passage issue. So if we want to really solve that problem in all of the 90,000 dams in this country, hydropower actually accelerates that process by adding hydropower to non-powered dams. So I think that from Department of Energy's perspective, to see that happen would be a positive thing. And certainly for those people throughout the country who experienced drought in the last few years on the West Coast and so forth, all those dams holding back that water, you realize how important they are. And they probably will continue to be so as climate change wreaks its change on all of us.
And are you working with environmental groups to present Whoosh as an alternative to the removal of dams to promote spawning salmon and other native species?
Really good question. So we have probably more relationships with tribes at various project sites and so forth over the years. In fact, the tribes have been the earliest adopters of our technology. The NGOs are that are out there, and there are a lot that have an interest in usually dam removal. So that there is a conflict here with many of them. There is a recognition by those who are thoughtful, I guess you could say, that all these dams can't come down. Many of them are preventing flooding and are used for water and irrigation and so forth. And I think a little slow, I would say, to recognize that there are technology solutions to this. And we certainly reach out all of the time. We welcome the opportunity if anybody reaches out to us to be as open as we can and address the concerns. And we would love to work with folks, but it is, I will say, it is a frustrating thing at times where a group can be so determined to take down a dam that you end up in a stalemate that can go on for 20 years, and you can see the fish extirpated, in other words, disappear entirely during that battle that goes on as to whether or not the dam should or should not come down. And I think we've taken a very practical perspective on this, is that in the bigger scheme of the climate change and this transition to an electric grid, the country needs the dams, and the world needs the dams, maybe even more than the United States does in many places of the world, to have power. And so just recognizing that, and that there needs to be, if nothing else, an interim solution as we transition and build up other renewables. But the fact of the matter is wind and solar can't get us there because they're intermittent. And really, with the power that is generated from hydropower, it is the best, cleanest substitute for renewable energy. In my mind, and our company's position is, that's a reality we're dealing with today. It probably won't be in 50 years. There probably will be storage, ability to store power beyond what batteries can do today, are capable of doing today. But today, really, the battery backup for the world is hydropower. And so we think getting the fish back up over these dams and upriver is critical to supplying the nutrients in those rivers. And then on the downstream side, getting those fish safely back down again. I think we need to have a serious discussion about what that means, because at some dams, many smaller dams, and depending on the turbines that are in the dams, the fish do make it safely through there. But at dams where there is a problem, is it the dam, we have to ask ourselves, or is it the fact that we've got a bunch of invasive predatory species that are in these reservoirs, basically lining up to eat the fish, the native fish, as they're migrating out, because they're somewhat disoriented when they first come through all that turbulent water, and they are really vulnerable to predation. So I think there are solutions to these problems, and we haven't publicly announced this, but we really see the downstream problem as not a problem as much as a downstream guidance issue. So how do you guide the fish on the downstream side to a place where you can then safely transport them over the dam, rather than them going through a turbine that in a very high head dam that might create such a pressure differential that they don't survive that. So as a fish guidance issue, by defining the problem differently, it's not downstream passage. It's easy to get fish to go down. I can do that all day long, just with gravity. But getting them to that spot is the difficult part. And we think we've got a solution there. We are actively talking with agencies about where we can put that in and have that tested. And I think it will eliminate that argument for all dams if we can do that, because really the options of getting the fish down are many, as long as you can aggregate them into a single location, rather than having them spread out, everywhere in that river behind me, which is what usually happens. So the fish are wandering around trying to figure out how do I get past this dam, and there's no queue for a safe passage down.
And then, are there any key partnerships that are important to growing the company, suppliers, or for sales and marketing? What can shareholders do to help?
Wow. Well, thank you for asking that question. One of the reasons that we wanted to do the crowdfunding was the political pressure does make a difference. And too many times you'll see newspaper articles, for example, come out, and the problem is perfectly defined for what we solve, and nobody mentions our system. And many times we'll be involved. And part of that is being a private company, and government agencies not wanting to appear that they're endorsing any kind of product. So that's part of the problem. It is also the inertia of doing what we've always done before. And to be honest, that's the biggest obstacle we have to come over. So I think it's not a technical problem for us anymore. It is a political one, and the politicians listen to the people, the shareholders. The bureaucrats and the agencies listen to some extent to the politicians. And so, and our job as a company, we have taken steps with the agencies. So we meet quarterly with the National Marine Fisheries Service, for example, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service representatives, so that they are up to speed on the technology, because we're moving so much faster than what they're used to, I guess you could say, that it's difficult for those who are out in the field those agents to really understand where things are. We've also published all of our studies on our website so that that can be referred to. But I think the main thing that everybody can do is when you see a newspaper article, in the comments section, comment on it and put a link to our site and so forth, and just continuously hammering on there is a solution to this already. That makes our job that much easier, because there are really issue or fish passage issues all over the world, and it takes a fair amount of time from our standpoint to educate those involved on it, and to the extent that we can do sort of some pre-education by our shareholders doing that, or pointing to our websites and webinars and so forth, trade shows and things that we do, it can only help. We are also doing one other thing that is helpful. I think we call out Bellingham Technical College, for example, up in the northwest corner of the state here. They have a whole course on fisheries management, and they're training really the young fisheries managers of the future. And we have participated with them every year for the last 4 or 5 years now, to expose them to the technologies and the techniques and so forth. And it's I think once people get comfortable with it, it's the difference between using an old rotary dial phone and a smartphone. It's that dramatically different. And so there is no good reason to keep doing what we've been doing when we know it's not good enough, and it's limited. But as a Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife person told me on 1 week ago, we were meeting, and he said, Vince, it's just hard to change the government, and that's what we're doing. I mean, it's at some point, and we are really right there. The studies are at such a level that it's if you were a physician, it would be malpractice to continue to do what you were doing if a new device or a new procedure came out that produced better results. That's where we are. It's just that framework doesn't exist as you would in the medical field. So what the shareholders can do, because I think the public gets it. I really do. I think we are offering a better solution that's sort of in the middle of the two extremes of, you can have dams and no fish, or no fish and dams. That doesn't have to be that choice. And with the acknowledgement that what we've done in the past isn't good enough. From my perspective, it continues to be something of education. Clearly, the thing that everybody can do for us today, right now, though, is invest. I will say that right now, because of what is in front of us in the second half of the year, because of the opportunities that are going to be there for us, and our need really to position the company to take advantage of that. And we're working as hard as we can to do that. But I know that it does require the monies that we're trying to raise here. So I will say, this round has been disappointing compared to our first round on Start Engine. We raised almost more than 1.4 million on the first round on Start Engine. We're well short of that here. and yet we've got 2,400 followers or so. And I think I put out a message saying, if every one of those followers put in the minimum investment, we would have the money that we were looking for to raise here. So if we don't do it through Start Engine, we'll have to get it elsewhere. From my perspective, I'd much rather have the Start Engine investor come in now, and because of all these other benefits, really is making it known. And don't be afraid to point back to our page, which is studies and so forth when you're commenting on those things. It's hard for us. It's much better when somebody else is commenting than for us as a Whooshh company to say, hey, by the way, we can do this. But it's better if you're out there saying, hey, you really have to look at Whooshh. Why don't you contact them? Because it's amazing to me how rarely that reach out occurs, and it's a real dilemma how to get past that. But I think it's the public pressure and the shareholder pressure for sure that will make it happen.
And someone wanted to go back to the Big Bear example. What were your objectives, major challenges, and how did you measure success?
Yeah, Big Bar, I think they're referring to up in
Big Bar.
Canada.
Sorry,
yeah.
My apologies.
So clearly the biggest challenge there was the location itself. That was, for those who are unfamiliar with it, it was a natural, what they call the rock slide, but it was really a part of a cliff that fell into the river, the Fraser River, and created a natural dam that was about 15 feet high across the width of the river, which was about 180 feet wide in that location. And about 80% of the salmon run coming up the Fraser River would normally go by that location. And that was, from the time we received a contract, that was going to happen in about 3 months time. The location itself was remote, and so it had no roads, internet, or housing, anything. So we were really in a very remote location, and all of that needed to be brought in. I think that was all expected, and the other partners that were on that project handled a lot of that infrastructure civil work portion before, and were working before we could arrive on the site. They had to get that part done. So the fact that took as long as it did, it gave us very little time. But the biggest challenge there was really the fact that the location where we were asked to put in the system, as it turned out, probably because of that landslide and some big freshet events, which it means the melt, the snow melt and so forth that occurred that spring, meant that location where they had chosen was underwater 3 times. So while we had originally proposed that to be on a floating barge, like again, the one behind me here, that was not what they elected to do. And what that meant was we actually had to pull the system out and reinstall it 3 times. That was, from a company standpoint, that was by far the biggest challenge, because that was not in the plan, and was very disruptive. The good thing about when that particular thing is that when those events were occurring, the flow was so great that the salmon couldn't reach where we were, so they were held downstream, and it was an extreme year from a weather event standpoint. That was by far the biggest challenge. The other one, which is not a normal event at all, is that the site itself was continuing to fall apart. So in other words, there were continuous rock slides and rock falling off the cliff. And that made it for a dangerous work site by its nature. And the opportunity to actually be on the site to set it up and or to run it were often limited in hours. I think we figured we only operated just over 4 hours a day, the system during that time, and then everything had to be shut down. Everything was running on generators and so forth at that site, and everything had to be restarted in the morning because of where it was located. So I think there will never be a project like that again, I doubt. But what it has done for us as a company, the number of things that we had to overcome there, almost every other location seems simple in comparison to that particular site. It obviously no site is the same, but the confluence of conditions at that particular location and the amount of time that there was to address it was so compressed. It was exciting. It was a project of a lifetime for us that were involved in it. You know, the fact is, on the best days, salmon, sockeye salmon in particular, they were coming in large numbers in late July there, and we were at about 27 fish a minute through the system, in a system that had 6 tubes coming out of it. So I think that's if you do the math on that, that's a lot of fish over the course of a day. If they were coming in continuously, they were not doing that, but when they would come in these bursts, it really demonstrated why we are confident about the system in a more normal dam setting, that it will operate extremely well.
And then we have a question here from Miguel on investing. I would like to invest, but $500 on a Reg CF, it's quite a lot for a non-accredited investor. Can you make an update on LOIs, talk with certain groups, etc., to show that there are more reasons to invest?
Say that about the LOI part again.
Yeah, can you make an update on LOIs, talk with certain groups, etc., to show that there are more reasons to invest?
Yeah, let me. So got to think about what I can say, what I can't say here. So yeah. There is a letter of intent that we have announced on signed that's with recently, and this is with a company called Hinchinbrook. They do a lot of the tagging and monitoring on for fish in the rivers and the data that's collected out of the rivers and so forth. And we are collaborating with them to optimize our scanning, sorting algorithms to identify those tags on the fish. There's a joke that we're studying the fish so much, we're studying them to death. And that's because oftentimes there's so much handling of the fish that's involved in these studies that that puts them at real risk every time you do that. This would really minimize the need for doing that once the fish was tagged, and you could have our systems at every location on at the dams, on the rivers, and so forth, and pick those tags up as it goes through our system. In the bigger scheme of things, I think the one that I think we can talk about freely enough here is in the Northwest. It's been a known issue for years that starting at Chief Joseph Dam on the Columbia River, that dam doesn't have fish passage. The fish have come over a number of dams prior to reaching that location, but from that point on, the salmon have had no place to go since the 30s, and that's been the end of the line for them. The reality of it is that the Columbia continues on up into Canada, and also branches off and going into the east into Idaho and so forth. And there are a number of dams that after that, after Chief Joseph, the next one is Grand Coulee Dam, which is most people know the name. It produces a lot of power. It is not the highest dam in the world, but it's a big, wide dam there. Those two dams, it's totally possible to get the fish over those. And one of those grant applications that we applied for was with the Upper Columbia tribes. And there's a number of tribes that are part of that organization, but to name a few, the Colville are the ones right there located at the Chief Joseph Dam. And on the other end of that in Spokane, in the east, the Spokane tribe, there's two really terrific biologists that have been working for years to restore salmon in the Upper Columbia. And we have worked with them in the past, and in this grant application, getting all the information together with them and the planning that's already taking place for that. Assuming that grant money comes through, we can have fish passage at Chief Joseph Dam in 2024. That's an example of working with the stakeholders at a site, at a location, where there are other participants and others who have an interest in this. I don't want to limit it to them, but they're clearly the leading organizations who are doing this restoration work. And for us and for them, I think it is really important at this Chief Joseph, because the treaty between the United States and Canada is for use of the water on the Columbia River ends in 2024. And to be able to demonstrate that fish passage at Chief Joseph and Grand Coulee is possible, that means the fish could potentially get all the way up to the headwaters in Canada as well. So we have another project that's exciting up in Canada to take it from the other side of things, that we've been told that we are a finalist in, so far as we getting that project, and it's a one that we're equally excited about. It's back on the Fraser River, which is where we were for Big Bar, and it's another reintroduction effort that's being made there, and it's a site that's particularly well suited for our technology. And those announcements will be coming out in May of this year. So I think whether or not any one of these projects that we get, and I can tell you we have a top 10 list that we keep rotating as with projects that I can't get into the details of here, but the funnel, if you will, the pipeline of what is coming it's really exciting from a project standpoint. I'll just mention two others because they're both part of these grants that we applied for. That one in the Midwest that I mentioned that we just delivered the system to for the carp, there's a follow-on grant application there. And I think the amount of money that's already been appropriated by the federal government to tackle this invasive carp problem is about $700 million. And they are just waiting for the technology to be, not necessarily our technology, a technology to show that it's capable of removing these fish from the rivers, and they're ready to put those systems to work. So that's another great example. And on the East Coast, most of the salmon have been wiped out, so you're dealing with different species there. Their American shad are a native species as opposed to the West Coast where they're non-native. And we've also applied for a system that we were going to hopefully put in that would address for those kinds of fish that are weaker swimmers like shad passage on the East Coast as well. So we feel like the projects that are right in front of us with funding secured will enable us to have an impact on both coasts and the middle part of the country. And so we will have our hands full with that.
Awesome. I really like the name Whoosh. How did you come up with the name?
For us, we had I mentioned briefly, we had another name prior to Whoosh that was much more descriptive. And from a trademark standpoint, you're looking for something that's suggestive. And it happened in actually a conversation with our chairman of the board. And we were talking about this name issue and bouncing some ideas off of each other. And this one came up, and I think it was instantaneously understood that this was, it connoted the high tech that we were really putting to work here. It was memorable. But most importantly, I think if we were going to be a company that was selling worldwide, everybody could relate to a whoosh sound, which is the sound that the system makes when a fish is traveling through the tube at about 22 feet per second. So as it's moving through that tube, as that fish goes through. So it's it is descriptive in its own way, but it's more suggestive. And for us, it's a fun name to work with, for sure.
And I think I read that Whoosh pivoted its focus to just fish transport and fish passage some years ago now. Why, as an investor, should I be investing in the company today?
Yeah, actually, many of the things we were just mentioning here, the market has, I think we were very early on recognizing what the problem was for fish passage and the problem it was presenting for the dam owners and operators. What has happened with this movement towards clean energy, it's reinforced the market that we thought was there. So the market is really coming to us. There's a compelling need that has to get addressed. There's up to 300 relicensings that are taking place here in the country at dams that require relicensing here in the next between now and 2030, I think it is. So just those alone could keep us very busy. So I think the opportunity is so great for us that that's what I'm excited about.
And who are the biggest dam owners in the United States?
Yeah, there are two ways to look at that. On the public side, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is the largest. They have about 1,000 dams, and the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has about 600 or so. On the private side, about 70% of the dams in the country are privately owned, and the largest ones are like Brookfield Renewables, which is a publicly traded company, and some of the projects that they have start up in Canada, and they have projects all the way down into South America.
Let's see.
Khalil, I have to step away for 1 second. I'm so sorry.
Yeah,
Just
no
one
worries.
second. I'll be right back.
No problem. We have about 5 minutes or so left in the webinar. If you have any last minute questions, right now is the time to ask them. I will make sure they get answered. That's it.
I apologize for that. I wasn't, suddenly wasn't feeling so good.
No worries.
There.
Well, we are coming here down towards the end. Vince, what are some final thoughts, you want to give the audience before we sign off today?
Yeah, I know it's a difficult time. The one reference there to the $500 is a lot. I think it is and it isn't, both. And the only reason I'm saying that is I think what we are offering here is a great investment opportunity, but we're also you're also investing in your future. And I think we really are offering, in that respect, a unique investment opportunity here. We get to be the good guys in a lot of these projects that we are involved in, because we do provide a win-win solution. And obviously the biggest winner is the fish, but it is really all of us that are winning by providing this kind of solution. So from an investment standpoint, I always say to anybody, if you're not comfortable, don't invest. It's a cool technology. It's not often in this space where you've got something that gets the kind of social media reaction that we get with our stuff. And I think that's our magic, is that, if you will, we've got a very sexy product. It's just cool watching fish flying through these tubes and so forth. And but it's also, we also did the hard work. We did all the studies over the years. We know that it works. We know that it works better in survival, and we know that the fecundity, that is the offspring survival, is better that from fish that have used the Whooshh systems. So if the world is interested in solving this problem, and I believe they are, this conflict between dams and fish, we are the ones that are doing it and have been doing this for almost a decade from the time that we started. And I think it's important for people to understand, while as an investor you like to have a quick investment and turn your money around in 3 years and so forth, that doesn't happen very, very often. If it's an app or something like that, it's possible. But when you're dealing with hardware and software and combinations, it's a 10-year cycle, and we're entering our 10th year here. This is where we should be. We are where we should be, despite COVID, and the opportunity now for us to take what we have built and what we've learned over the years and scale it up, which is where our focus is right now. Our ability to scale, commercialize the applications that we've created over the years. We are putting together a specific website for the government and business purchasing of our equipment and so forth, which we will be rolling out this, if by the end of Q2 is what our plan is here. So if we can do those things, we are decreasing the friction to purchasing the systems. And as I said before, it doesn't take too many sales before our fixed costs are covered. And then the profit can come on top of that. So the opportunity is there. We did it in 2020 when things were just starting to really get going, when the wheels fell off with COVID. But we survived through all of that, in part because of all of our start engine investors, but our original accredited investors too. We do need another cash infusion. That's why we're doing this right now. And this may be the last opportunity to jump in, because by fall of next year, we may not be in need of raising additional capital. So if you're interested in what we're doing, I think it's time to make that decision. And again, only do what you're comfortable with. But we're here in Seattle for our headquarters, but we've been all over the country and frankly all over the world. I'll give you one last thing here. And we were just notified last week, the government in Norway has an invasive species problem. It's actually pink salmon that are invading their rivers where only Atlantic salmon were. And those pink salmon have come from Russia, from escaped farm pens over the years. We will be one of 5 companies that they're going to contact, and they'll be looking for AI sorting technology like we have to separate the fish. They'll choose 2 companies to deploy a initial pilot system, and then between those 2, they will choose 1 company to provide those systems throughout the country in their rivers there. We have to win that. So that's no guarantee, but I can tell you we've been the only ones doing it as long as we have. So anybody else that we're going to be up against is not going to have the kind of experience that we already have. So that's it, Khalil. Oops, I can't hear you.
I was on mute there. Sorry about that. Thank you everyone who attended the webinar today. If you weren't able to attend, don't worry. This webinar has been recorded this whole time. We will be posting a recap video. And for those who are interested in learning more about Whooshh and what they're doing there, I've added the Start Engine link in the chat box below. Make sure to check it out and reach out to Vince with any additional questions. Hope everyone has a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.